At the top it says, before we can move on to the lives of Isaac and Jacob in our study, we need to dig a little deeper into some genealogy issues that still have a bearing on our world today. They absolutely do. In fact, last week I was reading some news, The Hill newspaper, an article, 5 factors that could decide a Biden-Trump race. This is last week. Niles Stanage, January 25th, 2024. The 4th factor was the Israel-Hamas war. It's rare for a war to have an electorally seismic effect unless there are American boots on the ground. Israel's campaign in Gaza, launched in reprisal for Hamas's October 7th attacks inside Israel, may be an exception. The reason is the conflict's clear capacity to cleave the Democratic Party in half. Among older, more centrist Democrats, support for Israel remains strong, but it's an entirely different picture among young progressives, who are far more likely to sympathize with the Palestinian cause. This rift has been growing for years, but it takes on a whole new political salience when Israel is estimated to have killed more than 25,000 Palestinians, by the count of the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. Israel's campaign has forced the displacement of almost 2 million people in Gaza and drawn a charge of genocide from the government of South Africa. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed any possibility of a two-state solution to the broader conflict. Throughout it all, Biden has remained broadly supportive of Israel. The fact that he has recently tempered his rhetoric has done little to cool the fury of progressives. Biden's speech on Tuesday was disrupted repeatedly by pro-Palestinian protesters. The bigger political problem for Biden is the conflict's capacity to depress turnout from key parts of the Democratic base, including young voters, black voters, and Arab American voters. It's conspicuous that among the battleground states, Biden is polling especially badly in Michigan. He carried the Wolverine state in 2020 after Trump had won it in 2016. Michigan is home to more than 200,000 Arab Americans. Let me translate that for you. What happened 4,000 years ago between Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham and Sarah's Egyptian maid, is one of the factors that could decide our next presidential election.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, when 3 in 10 Americans say that they support Palestine over Israel, and all of those are voting Democratic Party, that makes it pretty interesting. That means that Abraham in Genesis is affecting our elections today. He is having an influence today. So, quick review here.
Things just don't work out very well when you take them in your own hands.
Well, how in the world could he have realized the effect that his choice would make? So, quick review before we leave Abraham and focus on Isaac and Jacob. That's what today's lesson is going to be. Aside from Moses, nobody in the Old Testament is mentioned more in the New Testament than Abraham. You'll remember that James calls Abraham a friend of God. Paul tells us more than once that Christian believers in all generations are children of Abraham. So not only is Abraham important to the Jews, but he is important to all Christian believers as well. The life of Abraham takes up a lot of space in Genesis, first mentioned in chapter 11. He dies in chapter 25. We're going to read those verses real shortly. When we first meet Abraham, he's already 75 years old. Now this is review, okay? Genesis chapter 12, God calls him out from his home, tells him to go to a land that he will show to him. God makes 3 promises to Abraham: promise of a land of his own, promise to be made into a great nation, and the promise of a blessing. And these 3 form the basis of that covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, which you've already seen reiterated by God several times, including to his son Isaac and his grandson Jacob. And what makes Abraham really special, though, is that he obeyed God. He had faith. He demonstrates his obedience with his faith. The author of Hebrews says, I put it there on your sheet in the bold, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. Abraham responded to the call of God. He obeyed willingly. No arguments, no hesitation. Last week we saw his faith tested. 25 years later, actually, it'd be 40 years later by the time Isaac was born. God tells him to go sacrifice his son, the child of the promise. We don't know exactly what's going on in Abraham's heart, but we do know from Hebrews that in his mind he thought, if I've got to sacrifice this boy, God's going to have to do what?
Bring him back to life.
Resurrect him from the dead. He was willing. He was willing to be that obedient to God. He had that much faith. Abraham was not a perfect man, not by any stretch. We've already seen this. In fact, we didn't mention in this study, but you know that twice Abraham lies in order to protect himself, and in doing so puts his wife Sarah at risk when he's in foreign places. She's my sister. She's not my wife. Pretty dangerous to do this. In both times, God blesses him despite his deception. Not because of his deception. Despite his deception. And then, of course, the issue with Hagar, the maid. Not a perfect man. Not a perfect man. But, he was chosen by God. And God blessed him. And we are beneficiaries of that blessing because through Abraham comes who?
Jesus.
Yes, the Savior of the world. So, we're going to read about the very end of Abraham's life, and we're going to see, again, we're going to talk about Ishmael a little bit, and we're going to take it further than we have in previous weeks. You're in Genesis chapter 5, yes? You may not remember this about the end of his life. 25 verses 1 through, I put 1 through 12 on your sheet. We're going to do 1 through 11. Abraham had taken another wife, whose name was Keturah. Did you remember that? Old man Abraham took another wife. Then it gives a whole lot of names of children and their descendants and so on and so forth. Let's skip down to verse 5. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. Did you catch that? He left everything he owned to Isaac. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Abraham lived 175 years. That's a lot of candles on that birthday cake. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him together. Do the math. If he's 175, then that means that Isaac's got to be about 60 at this time, right? And Ishmael about 75. Buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. Okay, so even though we read, easy question here, that Abraham had children with another woman, what do we read about his inheritance? How much of it? All of it went to Isaac. You got that? Second question then, I'm not trying to trick you. What did Ishmael receive?
Gifts.
If everything goes to Isaac, what did Ishmael receive?
Nothing.
Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Zip. Are you surprised? You're not surprised. But I understand, because this is going to get real important here in a second. Isaac gets everything. Ishmael gets nothing.
Yet he was the firstborn.
Yet he was the firstborn.
And that was a custom for the firstborn to get the
How does Ishmael feel?
Like going to war.
What do you want to say, Winona?
Just like they're still doing today.
Oh, keep that in mind. Yeah. Genesis 25, verses 12 through 8. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's slave Hagar the Egyptian, okay, we're going to come back to that, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. And then he gives a whole bunch of names. There's 12 of them. Verse 16, these were the sons of Ishmael. And these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt, as you go towards Asher, and they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them. What word describes the relationship between Ishmael's sons and their tribal relatives?
Hostility.
Hostility. Key word, hostility. Okay, so let's move forward. Let's push this forward to our election, okay, in 2024, because number 4 on your sheet, I've given you a couple of blanks. This is important. Biblical understanding will lead to political insight. Biblical understanding will lead to political insight. You can understand a whole lot about what is going on in the world and even why people vote the way they do if you have a little bit of understanding of the Bible and what has happened here in Genesis. This helps you to be more educated and make good choices at the voting booth. And I think it also gives you a lot more confidence in the Bible when you see how all this biblical history still has an impact on what's going on today. So at the bottom of your sheet, I've given you that chart that you saw 5 weeks ago, the genealogy of Shem, because I want to remind you again that these men are in the same family line. Remember, Noah has 3 sons? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, through Shem, you see Eber, the Hebrews. You go all the way down to Abraham. Abraham has these sons. You see Ishmael and Isaac right underneath him. And then you see the other guys far over to the left, who you just read about in the first part of 25, and you probably forgot about, right? You forgot that there are these other sons born to him. They don't count. We don't care. Ishmael and Isaac are from the same family line. Same dad. Same granddad. And then you see through Isaac comes Jacob and Esau, and of course Jacob then is renamed Israel. And you got the Israelites. Same family. They're both Semites. Let me make a statement here, and maybe you'll be able to relate in some way. Sometimes being in the same family can amplify a conflict.
You reckon? Sure, when it comes to dividing up the
That too. When there's stuff involved, absolutely. You would think that family means that everyone would get along better, right? Same blood? Same daddy? Same granddaddy? No, sometimes it means more water under the bridge and more grudges.
But even as you look at this chart you did, Jacob was the second born twin, and he got the inheritance, and it's, and then didn't Isaac accidentally bless not Isaac, the next one, Jacob? Did Jacob not bless?
Yes. And all these accidents aren't really accidents, of course, but yes. Yeah, it doesn't quite go as the culture would dictate that it should go.
I think there's a scripture that says God's ways are not our ways.
No. You just read in Genesis 25 that Ishmael had 12 sons, and those 12 sons became 12 tribes. Gosh, that seems so familiar, 12 sons and 12 tribes, huh? Who else had 12 sons that became 12 tribes?
Jacob.
Jacob did. So there's some interesting parallels as we move forward between these families. Jacob has 12 sons too. 12 tribes of Israel came from the 12 sons of Jacob. And if you turn over your sheet, you can then read the names of the 12 sons that God gave to Jacob, who he renamed Israel. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now I put 2 of those sons in italics because something happens. They don't necessarily have 12 neat tribes out of these 12 sons. Levi becomes the priestly tribe. They don't get a land of their own. They get cities scattered throughout the whole region, and God is their portion instead of the land, okay? So 12 becomes 11, but then to make up for it, Joseph's is split into his 2 sons to equal 12. You look at the 12 tribes right beneath there, Ephraim and Manasseh were Joseph's sons. That might be who you're thinking of, Nancy. They are blessed. And sometimes in the Bible, Ephraim is called the tribe of Joseph. So 12 sons, 12 tribes, but it's not even. Instead, you bring in the grandkids to represent 2 other tribes. Got it? Okay. So this history adds to what we've already talked about. Let's trace Ishmael's history moving forward. And you've already heard a little of this.